welcome to my very first reading vlog. 2019 was the year that I fell back in love with books, and honestly, it's a year that I'll never forget. I decided to start a booktube channel because of this love, and I haven't really looked back ever since. Not only was this year full of lots of amazing books, but it was full of hedgehog baths, puppy love, planting plants, going to the bookstore, and lots of baking. When I say lots of baking, I mean lots of baking. I've met some lifelong friends this year, and I'm so grateful for all the support and love that you all give me on a daily basis. Okay, let's get into my year in books. I read a total of 22,245 pages across 62 books. That is definitely the most books that I've ever read in my whole life. And I found some new favorite books of all time. So without further ado, let's get into my favorite books of 2019. Today I have a bunch of books that I read in 2019. All of my favorites. I have 10 novels, and then I also have a few mangas and graphic novels that I want to talk about as well. So let's get started. I'm gonna bring Winnie up here with me. Are you cute? Are you cute? She's definitely a big perk from 2019, aren't you? Yeah, sweet girl. I'm not gonna go in any particular order with the novels. I'm gonna start with the adult and young adult, and then I'll do the middle grade. But I don't have a particular order because honestly, I love them all for different reasons, and they all have a special place in my heart for different reasons. But maybe actually I'll go from the order that I read them. I think that's probably the best way to do it. All right, so the first books I want to talk about are, of course, the Folk of the Air series. This series has such a special place in my heart. I fell in love with it right from the get-go. The first book was amazing. The second book is my favorite. And the third book, I feel like, even though there was some parts of it that were a little bit disappointing, overall, I really liked it, and I love this series. I think it's such a good series. I think my favorite parts of this book are how Cardan and Jude act together. I loved how slow-paced that their romance was and how much of a build-up it was. It was just so much fun to read, and I feel like Holly Black does a really good job of just giving you enough to make you satisfied for a little bit, but you just want more. You keep grabbing at whatever she gives you, and I think she's just such an excellent writer when it comes to that. Her world that she created was beautiful. I really wish that the third book would have gone more into that a little bit more. But overall, it just is such a special book to me. It's definitely the reason that I started my booktube channel. I had just finished The Wicked King, and I was like, I have to talk about this. The Wicked King had just a mind-blowing ending, and it was amazing. It was so good, and I remember it was the first book that I've really felt that book hangover where I just didn't want to read anything else because I was just so shocked and blown away by the ending of that book. So I love it, and I just highly recommend this series to anyone. It's super fun and you won't regret it. The next book I have is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I adore this book so much. To me, the writing is just so much more mature than a lot of the other books that I've read. I love how well written it is. I love how she gets inspired by classic fairy tales. I love that she does her research about the sceneries, about the locations that she's writing about, even though they're made up. She does get inspiration from real places, and I love it so much. This is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. It has 3 different females' perspectives in it, and each of the females have totally different personalities, and it's really interesting to see how they merge together. The ending of this book was another ending that I just absolutely loved. It was just so well wrapped up. This book was entertaining for me from the beginning to the end. I felt like it talked about a lot of amazing topics, how females should be treated, how they were treated. There was also talk about abuse and stuff in this, but I just loved it. I love when authors can wrap social topics into a book and make it interesting and make it relatable, and it's just beautiful. And this is definitely one of those books that you should read during the winter time. I read this last winter around the same time, like a year ago, and it was just magical. It was absolutely magical. I really want to reread this book again one day, but yes. Okay, the next book I have is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So this book was one of those books where I finished it and I was like, what do I feel about this? But the more that I let this book sink in, the more I loved it. I feel like the topics that this talked about were just so important. I got so much out of this book. This is based on true events, and you can tell that R.F. Kuang really did her research. This is another book that you can just tell that the author gave everything into this. She tried as hard as she could to make this book an amazing book. It's another book that has a more mature feeling. There's definitely a lot of trigger warnings in this book, and I just feel like you don't get a lot of those topics in fantasies. It's really interesting to see how both sides in this are fighting for what they believe in, but how war can affect someone, even someone who has the best of intentions. It can affect them and turn them into someone that they never thought that they could be. And that was probably my favorite part of this book. You don't realize what happens during a war. You hear it all the time, but when you read about it and when you read about all of the horrible things that happen in a war, it really does make you realize how terrible that it is. I know, like, of course everyone knows that war is terrible, but it's just so much more real when you actually have to read about it. So anyway, I should probably say what this is about. This is about Rin, who is accepted into a really well-renowned academy that she didn't think she was gonna get in because she is poor, but she got into it and she starts to learn magic, but a dangerous type of magic. And as this book goes on, she goes into the army. She gets assigned into a troop where she makes a bunch of friends, and then they have to see the effects that war has had on their country. And by the end of this book, she is a totally different person than she was in the beginning. Her morals have changed. Everything about her has changed, and it's just, I love it. Okay. Okay, the next one I have is Cersei by Madeline Miller. I just don't have words for this book. I definitely think that this is in the top 3, if not 1 or 2. I don't know. It's really hard for me to choose a top 1 or 2 out of all of these books because I love them. I read this with a group of people and it was really, really fun to read. I feel like we all had differing opinions on it. Some loved it and some didn't like it so much, but I adore this, like adore it. I love Cersei's story. I think she is such an incredible woman. Obviously she's fictional, but I just loved her so much. And she was another character that had total transformation throughout the book. I mean, her story is told over thousands of years because she's a nymph, which is like right below a goddess. So she lives for a really long time. And it's just incredible. I have talked about so many times how much that I love Greek mythology, but this, I think, made it even more clear how much that I find it interesting. I just love learning about these gods and goddesses who have the most horrible stories. They are just incredibly horrible creatures and people worshipped them, and it's just crazy to me. But Cersei's story is so beautiful because she starts in the kingdom of the gods. She is the daughter of Helios, the god of the sun. So she starts off there, and some of the decisions that she makes are very gray. She definitely makes some bad decisions, but she's raised in this place where gods just take advantage of each other. They just are horrible. So you really sympathize with her and you understand why she made these decisions. She also starts to make decisions that are very much human and empathetic, and she's never been raised to feel that way or to act that way, and so it's really cool to see her make these decisions. She gets banned to an island where it goes over the story of her and Odysseus. It has like familial love in it, it has romantic love in it. It's just such a beautiful story, and the end of it was my favorite part about it. I know that Cersei's story is definitely not true to this book, but the ending of this was what made it for me. And I'm really, really glad that the author made that decision for this ending because it was beautiful. So anyway, okay, let's move on to another one because literally I could talk about those books for forever. Okay, the next one I have is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is the first book in his series, and this was so much fun. I did not realize going into this that I would love this as much as I would because it's really dark. I mean, it's about an assassin named Mia Corvair, and she goes through a lot. She goes to this school where they are told to do all kinds of horrible things. And I knew this was going to be a dark book, but I didn't realize how funny it was gonna be. There was so much comedy in this, and I've always been in love with dark comedic movies and books, and this just fit the bill for that. I loved the assassin school setting in this. It was such a cool setting. I'm definitely excited to get to the other two in the series. I've heard so many people talk about them and how good they are. I will say this book started off to be really slow. Like, I remembered reading this and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. But the end, like the last half of this book was so good that this is one of my favorites. So it's just, I feel like that does not happen with me. Usually if I don't like the first half of the book, it's gonna be a 3-star book, but this was just so good and I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah. Okay, the next one I have is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This was one of those books that before I even started reading it, I knew that I was going to love it. There are some books that I see and I'm like, I'm going to love that. I feel like that happened with The Cruel Prince and Strange the Dreamer and Spinning Silver. All three of those books, before I even started reading them, I knew they were gonna be some of my favorites. And this was one of those as well. I just knew that this was going to be my type of book. And I love Margaret Rogerson's writing. I just think it's so fun. I feel like it's so different than any other YA writer. And I feel like YA writing sometimes can be a little bit too young for me at times. But Margaret Rogerson, I feel like, does a really good job of kind of being in the middle, like being in the middle of being an adult writer and a YA writer. She just does an awesome job. And this is about Elizabeth. She is a librarian in a magical library. She's been told her whole life that sorcerers are bad and everything that they represent is bad. They will just bring evil into your life. One night, when Nathaniel Thorne, a sorcerer, is visiting her library, something happens to one of the tomes. The tomes are like these really super powerful magic books, and they contain a lot of really powerful magic in them. And this tome turns into a monstrosity. And so she automatically thinks that the sorcerer is the cause of this, and that's all I'm gonna say. It's so much fun, and the romance in this was amazing. I love Nathaniel. I absolutely love him. He's probably my favorite love interest in any book that I've ever read. I just think he's hilarious. I loved the way that he was nervous and just so cute. He reminded me so much of my husband, and I think that's why I adored him so much. I am really excited to read all of Margaret Rogerson's books. I think she's definitely going to be one of my favorite authors. The next one I have is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This book just thinking about this book makes me want to cry because of how beautiful it is. It is gorgeous. The way that Laini Taylor writes is unparalleled, and I've heard that from so many people, but I didn't really understand it until I read this book. There are tons of quotes from this book that I could write down and I could just meditate on and get something from. Like, she talks about such real topics, things that you can really take into your life and change your life in a positive way. And It's so good. This is about Laszlo Strange, who is another librarian. How many librarians do I have in this? Just 2. Anyway, this is about Laszlo Strange, who's a librarian, and he has been obsessed with figuring out the secrets of an ancient city called Leap. He has been offered to go there, and so he goes there. And yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. It does have 2 different perspectives in it. It has Laszlo Strange, and then it has Cersei, who is an ancient god type of girl who lives in the city of Leap. Yeah. Anyway, I just love this book so much, and if you have ever thought about reading Strange the Dreamer, I highly recommend it. It's just so beautiful, and it's one of those books that you can continue to read over and over and over again and get something new out of every single time, which is why it's so amazing. And I can't wait to read the second one, hopefully soon. Okay, moving on to some graphic novels. I have 2 graphic novels here that are my favorites, even though I really did enjoy every graphic novel that I read this year, but these were my favorites. So let's start with Day Tripper by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. I feel like I'm so passionate about all of these books and I don't realize it until I start picking them up and talking about them. But man, this is a hard-hitting graphic novel. This by far is my favorite graphic novel I've ever read, period. I don't think anything will ever beat it. It is just so good. This talks about, I don't remember his name. I read this a really long time ago. Okay, so the main character's name is Braz, and this goes over his life story, but broken up into every moment that he died in his life. Now, you don't know which one is the true death. There's one in here that I like to imagine that this was his actual death. After every single story, he dies. And so it's just really, really cool. It talks about him as a young kid. It talks about the romances that he's been through, the kids that he has, just his whole life story. And it's just so beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. I really feel like this graphic novel makes you realize how precious that every single moment in your life is. The little moments, the big moments, every single moment in your life is special for some reason, and this book just makes you really realize that. And I feel like we live our lives going through our days, not thinking about those little moments that have made us happy. And I definitely want to reread this because I feel like that's a message that I need to hear often. I think life is so precious, and this is one of those books that really makes you see that. So anyway, I love it. The next book I have is, of course, The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. I love every single one of her graphic novels, but I didn't want to pull all of them out. So I just pulled out the first one I ever read, which was The Tea Dragon Society. Her illustrations are just gorgeous. I mean, I've talked about this so many times, but they're just gorgeous. Every single thing about them is gorgeous. I even bought the stuffed animals. There's stuffed animals of these little dragons, and I bought them because I love this book so much. It is so pure. It is by far the purest book that I've ever read. This is how I want life to be. I want it to be so magical and happy, and everyone loves each other. It also has really good representation in it, and it's just so pretty. I love it so much. Okay, let's go over the 3 middle grade books that I loved this year, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start with the one that I read first and then last. So the first one is Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. This is such a good middle grade series. I seriously feel like besides Harry Potter, this is one of the best. I haven't read anything that is as good as Harry Potter besides this one. I love how magical and whimsical it is, and the characters in it are also so dynamic. And I feel like as a kid, I would have adored this book. Like, this would have been one of my favorites for sure. I always compare it to Harry Potter and Alice in Wonderland. It has a lot of similar plot points to Harry Potter. It's not like the same scenery or anything like that, but it does have a lot of similar plot points to it. but it has like the whimsy of Alice in Wonderland. Like there's a giant cat, there's creatures that can talk that aren't human, and anyway, it's really cute. This is about Morgan Crow, who has been told her whole life that she is cursed and that she is going to die. Her family have prepared for this her whole life, and so she's just kind of accepted it. Of course, she doesn't want it, but that's what she's been told her whole life. The night that she's supposed to die, a man named Jupiter comes to her house and takes her away to a magical city, and there he wants to represent her for the Wondrous Society, which is kind of like a school, I guess, with people that have incredible talents and amazing talents. There's a race, I think, and a few other trials that she has to go through in order to get into the Wondrous Society, and it's just so cute. I can't wait to read the next book in the series. Okay, the next one I read was Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This is an amazing book that I had no idea was going to be amazing. I love Peter Pan. I've always been drawn to the story of Peter Pan. Whenever I'm feeling depressed or stuck or sad about something, I always tend to think about Peter Pan. I think the idea of never growing up, having grown-up responsibilities, but also living in Neverland where there's pirates and mermaids and adventure, there's just something about it that is so pure, and it really brings me back to my childhood and the things that I used to think about as a kid and the imagination that I had as a kid. And so I adore Peter Pan. I really found the book to be interesting because it was the classic Peter Pan that you've seen in movies, but it also had more depth to it. There's way more morals to the story, and Peter Pan as a character was just, he was selfish and he was not a good person. And to see that in a child's book, I think is really important for children to see what selfish decisions can do. And even as an adult, like seeing how Peter Pan is acting, but also you understand, like, I don't want to grow up. I don't want to have responsibilities. I don't want to feel depressed and sad. I don't want to do those things. I want to live like a kid and not have those same feelings. And it really does bring you into Neverland with it. There's a bunch of different stories in here that weren't in any Peter Pan movies that I've seen, which I really enjoyed reading those. And I think it's another book that I could reread over and over and get something new out of it, depending on where I'm at in life, you know? So anyway, okay, the last middle grade that I have is Green Glass House by Kate Milford. This is such a sweet story. I think that the feelings that I get from this, the memories that I have with this book, are going to be what I really, really remember about this. I read this a few days before Christmas. This book takes place on Christmas Eve, and I was drinking hot chocolate by the fire, doing a puzzle while listening to the audiobook for this, and it was just such a cozy time, and I felt so relaxed and at peace just reading this book. But also, the story is so sweet. This is about Milo, who is adopted, and he lives with his adopted parents in an old smuggler's den called the Green Glass House. They make this into a hotel, and on Christmas Eve, a bunch of people show up from different walks of life, all very mysterious and all somehow linked to the Green Glass House. He then makes friends with the cook's daughter, and they decide that they're going to try to figure out the mystery of the Green Glass House and why all these people are there. It also has a surprise ending, which I didn't see coming, and I feel like in a middle grade, if there's a surprise ending, that's a big deal. But I think my favorite thing about this book was how it talked about adoption and the thoughts that an adopted child would have. I've always really been interested in adoption and kind of felt a calling towards adoption. I don't know for sure if it's something that will ever happen for me and Teddy, but it's definitely something that I want to look into when we're ready. And to see the thoughts that a child who is adopted might have, I think is really important. And even though they were all positive, he loved his parents. He loved his adopted parents, and he felt guilty about wanting to know more about his real parents. And I just think that's so realistic to how a child would think about it. I also really loved there's an author's note at the end where the author talks about how her and her husband really want to adopt one day, and how they wrote this book for their future adopted kid. And it's making me teary-eyed now. It's so sweet. And you can tell that the author put so much love and care into this book. And when I read her note at the end, I just cried. It was so sweet. So anyway, yeah. Okay, and the last book that I have are A Silent Voice. I read all of these this year. There's 7 books, so I have the first one and the 7th one here. But I read all of them, and I love this book so much. I watched the movie and I bawled crying. I cried so hard in this movie. And I'm just so glad that I read this book. It was beautiful. It was so sweet. This is about a girl named Shoko, and she is bullied because she's deaf and she can't speak very well by a boy named Shoya. Yeah, Shoya, when they were kids. And this goes from their childhood to when they're like teenagers, and he has totally changed who he is, and he thinks he's a horrible person. He thinks he doesn't deserve anything because of what he did to Shoko as a child. It talks a lot about depression and even suicide and stuff like that. And even though it's really hard to read, I felt like they did such a good job of talking about those topics in a sensitive way and really making you feel for these characters, both of them. Both of them have been through so much in their lives, and to see how they end up in the end was just so beautiful. And yeah, I just love it. Such a good series, and definitely one that I will think about forever. All right, friends, those are my favorite books of 2019. I don't know if 2020 can beat this reading year. I feel like I had so much growth as a reader in this year. I've really found books that I absolutely adore with all of my heart and soul. And I don't know if 2020 will be the same, but I hope so. I definitely feel like I fell back in love with reading this year, and I can't wait to see what 2020 will bring me as far as books go. So I hope that it's gonna be good ones. But anyway, if you've read any of these books, let me know. Tell me what your thoughts were, if you agreed with me or if you didn't. I would love to hear your opinions, as well as your favorite books from 2019 as well. And maybe I'll read them in 2020 and find new favorites as well. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I love you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.